Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm James, continuing on with this Balsa USA Stingray 120 build. In this video, I'm going to be installing the two servos for the engine. So just to remind everybody, I'm going to be running this DLE-20 RC rear exhaust gas engine to power the plane. And there are two servos I'm going to be using. One's going to be for the throttle and one's going to be for the choke. And I chose these analog servos from Hitec. This is just basically a standard servo. It's their HS-485HB servo. And if you remember from the previous video, if you've been watching this build series, I mentioned I was going to be installing the servos here in this front compartment behind the engine. But one thing that I forgot is that, yeah, this is a gas engine, and it's recommended that you install the servos as far away as possible from the engine itself. And the reason that is, and I'll read it to you here in the manual, is because, it says right here, it says, do not install your throttle servo inside the engine compartment. Doing so could cause radio interference. Install all electrical radio devices at least 12 inches away from the engine. Now, that is unlike a glow-powered plane. You can put your servos in anything, anywhere you want. And I can't get into the details because I don't know exactly how or why. But basically, the electronic system in a gas-powered engine, you have this electric ignition module, which is providing a spark to the engine. That system can interfere with your radio components. So to be safe, I decided to move my servos, instead of installing up here in the front, I'm going to move them back here, sort of in a center section of the airplane below the wing, near my fuel tank. All right, so the other thing I wanted to mention is that the other recommendation in the manual is not to use a metal connecting rod from the engine to the servo itself. They recommend using basically a plastic rod, such as this, which I'll get into in just a few minutes, with no metal at all, because again, that will cause interference to your radio equipment. So what I'm going to be using, I'm going to be using Sullivan goldenrod connecting rods for this. And I'll show you kind of what I'm using in just a second here. And I'm also going to need to build a servo, kind of like a mounting rack, if you will, to hold the servos. I'm going to be making that out of wood. I have some balsa supports that I'm going to be using along the sides of the fuselage. And then where's my other piece of wood? Oh, here it is. And then I have this hardwood, relatively, I guess this is basswood, that I'm going to be using as rails to attach the servos to. So that's the steps I'm going to be following. So my goal here in this video is to get the servos installed in the fuselage, get the connecting rods connected to the engine, and that should take me to the end of the video because I don't think I'm going to have enough time to install the other servos for the wing and the tail section. As mentioned, I'm going to be using these Sullivan, this is the Sullivan goldenrod connecting rod set. And the thing about these is that they come in many different sizes and they're sort of color coded. And I have a package here. I'm actually not going to be using this particular set. I just wanted to show you kind of what the full package comes with. So it has an instruction sheet here that tells you how to install it. And it gives you some sizes and it gives you some numbering. It's like, for example, this one, again, mentioning the colors. This one's blue-gray. This set right here, that same thing just would have said blue-yellow. And then they have different diameters, and every diameter and every length has a different color. So this set that I have here is the same diameter as these pieces that I have in hand right here. It's just that the yellow set was a 48-inch long piece, and the gray set, as you see here, is just a 36-inch long piece. So that's the only difference. It's just the length and when it comes to the color codes. And again, if you get larger ones, and I have larger sets over here, they have like black. I think I have like black and yellow. They have some red and yellow. So each one of those, like I said, is just a different size. You just have to check those out to figure out what size you need. So what comes with these kits is, of course, it comes with the outer rod, sort of like the conduit, and then it has the inner rod. And then it comes with the clevises. You can kind of see in here. And it comes with these threaded studs. And it also comes with a piece of rubber tubing which you can cut, and it forms sort of, I guess, bushings, if you will, that you can use to help hold the connecting rods in place at different places. Usually what you do is you drill a hole through a bulkhead or you put a piece of wood across your, you take a piece of wood and you drill a hole through it, and then you feed the connecting rod, the outer connecting rod, through that, and then that little bushing, and I have one here, you cut your pieces, and I'll show this as I do it. You just cut a little piece off, you put it over the outer rod like that, and it just sort of secures it up against the bulkhead, if you will. Okay, so I'm going to set this aside, and the reason I'm not using this, like I mentioned, is because I have some pieces left over from my other sets, and I don't want to waste them. So I have a couple of lengths here that I've already cut, and they're close to being the proper length for this application. So the other thing, and I mentioned it just a little bit ago, is that you don't want to have, let me grab one. It's not recommended to use something like this. You don't want to have your servo here connected to the engine and then have this metal connection between the engine area and then your servo area. So again, don't use that, and you're going to be using plastic. And then this is, it's kind of typical, nothing special about it, but I'm going to be using small connecting rods like this. I'm going to use that on one side. I'll thread these in here, and then I'm going to bend them over, and I'm going to use these sort of kwik clips. I think these are from Dubro, and I'll show you how those work. But basically, you just kind of fold this over like an L shape, like a 90-degree angle. You put this dude on top of that, and then you just clip it on. It'll all make sense once I do it. And then on the engine side, I'm just going to use, if I can get it out of here with my fingers. On the engine side, I'm just going to thread a plastic clevis on here like this, and then thread that into my inner rod, and that'll connect to the engine itself. And as discussed, that'll prevent any interference kind of running down the connecting rod. So let me go ahead and pull one of these servos out so we can see what we're dealing with. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to start by connecting up I'm going to feed my control rod through, and I'm going to connect it to my throttle. So I'll have two of those control rods in here. And that's going to tell me sort of the height, if you will, and the location for the servos, which I'm going to put back here. So I'm going to have one kind of oriented like this, and then I'm going to have the other one's going to be oriented at 180 degrees like this, and I'm going to be cutting two pieces of the basswood to kind of go in here across like a beam or a rail, and then I'm going to help support that against the side of the fuselage. I'm going to notch this out here, and I'm going to slip the rail into this piece of wood, hopefully, and I'm just going to epoxy it all in. So I'm going to have that install that back here, and then we'll install the servos onto that, and then connect everything up to the engine. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and flip the plane over so I can get to the connections on the engine. There we go. So there is the throttle control arm, and then this is the choke. First thing I'm going to do is just going to go ahead and thread in these little studs into the inner control rod. This is when you need that kung fu grip. All right, so that's about as far as I want to go. And I'll put my thread the clevis on there. Okay, just like that. Now I'll go ahead and do the other one. Okay, so I have my two rods set up here, and now I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a little piece of this Tygon tubing, and I cut a couple little rings off of here that I'm going to use to help keep the clevis closed. This is a pretty common practice. And I'll bring one over, I'll bring it in from the back so I don't have to go over the front of the clevis, because it's a little bit harder that way. So hopefully I can, just pull this through. There it goes. Again, I'm using Tygon tubing because that's the fuel tubing for gas. you don't want to use this silicone you use for glow. Okay, so we got that one. Let me get the other one set up. There it goes. Get over there, little buddy. All right, so there we go. So I got that guy. So now I'll just bring him through the fuselage, through the access hole I created in the firewall earlier. I can see it. There it is. One. Where's your friend? Where'd you go there? Ah. Here. There it is. There we go, like that. There's that one. I'm gonna have to get in there and kind of clamp that on there. I'm gonna see if I can get underneath it with this screwdriver here. Okay, that's connected. All right, that one's on. All right, well, like sometimes happens to me, maybe often, I realized I had a problem. You may have picked up on it before I did, but by using this clevis system like this, it ends up that it actually interferes with the fuel tubing. And I put a piece of fuel tubing right down here, as you can see, and it interfered with that. So, and I kind of did a little bit of a test run on it, and it dragged across the top of that, so that just won't work. So what I did is I took this out, obviously, and I'm going to change up the way I do this. Let me pull out again on the camera. And I'm going to use this little dandy dude right here, if you can see it. And this just plugs straight into the control horn or the control lever on the throttle. It's retained by this little metal clip. And then I just put in the stud, or the wire will go straight into that little hole right there, and then I just tighten it down with the screw. Okay, so now I'm just going to use this. I'm going to thread this in and cut off a little section, and that will feed straight through. That's going to go like that. And you know, if you build the way I do, and I'm not saying you should, and probably a lot of times maybe you shouldn't, but I you know, I kind of get a plan in my head what I want to do, what I think's going to work out, and then along the way I realize that it can't for some reason, either because it's just not possible, like this kind of ended up being a problem, or sometimes I make a mistake or whatever. So kind of along the whole build process, I'm always making little changes to my plans, and hopefully in the end it all works out. So, you know, the whole thing behind my channel is that I just thought I would show you the way I do things. Never claimed to be an expert or anything like that. And hopefully what I do here can help somebody out. Maybe not. There we go. And then I always like to clean up sort of the sharp little burrs off things, just because I think that's the best way. So it doesn't get, something doesn't get caught on that or cut like the tubing somehow. I don't know. Plus, when you get rid of all the little burrs and such, it makes it easier for applications like this where you have to feed the piece through. All right, my friends. Well, unfortunately, I had to take the engine out. I was having a very difficult time getting into this area to work on this, to be able to put this little retainer on here. It was just pretty much impossible. I couldn't get underneath it and clip it on. And I also wanted to make some adjustments to the control arm itself to have it lined up properly. So, of course, here again, it's the choke, which is going to be open like this and then closed like that. And then the throttle is right here, and throttle set up nicely now. And it's going to clear the gas. It'll clear the line for the gas. Yeah, so, you know, unfortunately, that's sort of like one of the trade-offs. You know, I decided to go ahead and close off the top of the fuselage up here in the front just for the looks of the airplanes. I thought it looked nice, but by doing that, it really restricted my access to the engine. and that's sort of something you got to deal with. You know, if this was a cowled engine area, I can just pull the cowl off and work on the engine and put it back on, but it's not. So now I just need to go ahead and put the engine back in. It'll just take me a few minutes, and then we'll make our connections. All right, well, I got the engine reinstalled, and I have the choke hooked up like I did before. So now I'm just going to go ahead and install this control rod. So I'll bring it through from the bottom again and feed it through the firewall. There it is. And then this little guy just will slip into the little hole on the side of that connector. Again, that's a Dubro connector. I don't know what it's called, but you can just go to their website and find it. So let me tighten that down. Okay, there we go. Perfect. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and flip it over, and then we will put the servos in. Okay, so for now I'll just go ahead and slip on these outer control rod, or the conduit, just so we can kind of see where everything's gonna land. Something like that. And now we gotta move our fuselage up so we can see where the servos are gonna go. So one's going to go, well, they're both going to go right about here. One will be like right about there or so, and then the other one will flip it around. I think I'm going to flip it around, we'll see, but it's going to be somewhere like right and about here somewhere. So that the little rack, or the rails I'm going to put, are going to go right in here. I think this width is about 4 inches across. I got this doubler, but for the outside I think it's 4 inches from the inside and the inside of that outer balsa. So something like that. So I'll just go ahead and cut my stock a little bit on the long side, and we'll try to fit it in there. So I'll just give myself a little more than 4 inches, maybe about let's go about a 1/16. Boy, that's not often that I get the cut right on the first time. Amazing. All right, so I don't want my rails to be right up against the servo, because it's hard to get it in because of the wire on it is kind of sticking out on one side, so it's always kind of hard to get your servo in. So you got to give yourself a little bit of room for it to get through. So just bring it out a tad, something like that. Even then, that may be a little tight. Let's see here. Something like that. And now I'll try to measure it without knocking it out. Of course, I'm looking at it upside down. So it's 2 and 3/8 outside to outside. All right, so now I have my little side braces. So I'm just going to measure out. Let me put this one up here. I said 2 3/8, and I'm just going to eyeball it kind of where it is here in the sort of in the center of this thing. So there's 2 3/8 is right about there. That would be the outside. Something like that. And of course this guy is going to be right here, like that. And we'll mark it. And of course I have my other piece here I'll just use for a reference. That. That. Then we'll find the center. 2, 4, 6, 7, 16ths is like right there. So that's the approximate center of this dude. Here and here. It's going to be like right here. This one here. Like that there. So I'm just using the wood obviously to sort of line everything up. Looks like it's crooked to me. Something like that. Actually it's got to be like this. So I should have done it this way, dummy. Okay. So those are my two pieces that I'm going to cut out now and hopefully be able to plug these guys into it. Alright, so I got my side braces, so let me go ahead and set this up for a test fit. Okay, let's not worry about the control rods now. We'll just throw this guy in here. Something like that. We'll have to level it out. Let's drop this guy. Come apart, mommy. Oops. There we go. Something like that will work. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to epoxy this in with my 30-minute epoxy. Okay, I'm going to mark it right about here. Doesn't have to be perfect where I put it, but this looks like a good spot. And then I'm going to drop it down. Yeah, I'll probably drop it down about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch, just so I kind of clear. It already, this control arm already does clear the top of the fuselage here. I just want to make sure I have some room to work. So I'll just be using again my Bob Smith Industries 30-minute epoxy. And for this, I'm going to put a lot in there. I'm not going to be stingy with this. Put a lot inside here. Okay, let's get her in there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get this lined up and I'm going to clamp it. Alright, well, I let this sit overnight and let's go ahead and take these clamps off. Put on these little pieces of wood to help protect the fuselage from getting kind of dented from the clamps. Pull this off of here. Get on this side, back in there. And let me slide the other servo in. There it goes. So I'm going to put them something like that. I think this one is going to be my throttle. Yeah, that'll be my throttle on the outside, and then this will be the choke. At least that's what I'm thinking right now. We'll see how it turns out as I do it. So for my radio setup, I don't think I've mentioned it before. Maybe I have, but I'm just going to be using this Futaba. This is a 6-channel T6J. You know, it's an older unit. I don't think they make these anymore. I don't think they produce these. You can still buy them. Maybe you can find them in places, but they're not readily available, I think, at this point in time. You know, it's like anything else electronic. They're constantly being upgraded and you're constantly becoming obsolete, but this system works really good. And then with it, I'm going to be using this Futaba. This is a R200 6GS receiver, again 6-channel. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm not going to try to fine-tune anything. I'm just going to get the servos. I'm going to get the servos turned on, and just so that I can kind of locate them properly, so that I can mount them. And then I'll probably cut the control rods to get them where I think they need to be, and I'll get them hooked up, but then I'll make my final adjustments later on. Once I get everything in the airplane, I'll do my final adjustments at the end. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull off the control arms, because I know for the choke it doesn't have that much movement. There's not a lot of throw on the choke. It's actually pretty small, so I definitely don't need that big of a lever, that big of an arc. So I'm going to pull that off of there. And then the throttle, a little bit different. Does have a pretty good throw on it, but I'm going to measure that. But I know it definitely is not going to be where it is here. So like most of your servos, these Hitec, they come with a variety of parts. So I'm going to use this a little bit smaller control arm here for the choke. I'll probably still end up maybe cutting a little bit of it off, but I think this will be a good size to start with. Something like that. That's got a lot of throw in it. And this guy I'm going to have to probably put somewhere back here, because it's going to arc all the way from the back to the front. Alright, so I'm just going to pull these off and cut the part off that I don't need so it doesn't get in the way. Ooh, there it goes. Trim it up a little bit. There's that one. Be careful so it doesn't shoot off in your eyeball when you do this. Not too pretty, but it'll do what it needs to do. Okay. Something like that. Choke. Yeah, it's going to have to really come down. And then the throttle. So with my receiver, like probably most of them out there these days, is that I can adjust the endpoints. On Futaba, they're called endpoints. And it's just basically the amount of throw in the servo. I can reduce it down as needed or increase it if I have to. So what I try to do is I try to mechanically get everything lined up as close as I can when I set up my, same thing with my control surfaces and obviously the engine, the throttle and everything. I try to mechanically, physically, if you will, whatever, get everything as close as I possibly can to being a nice, having a nice throw, and then fine tune it with the electronics. So to start with, I'm going to try to measure approximately how much throw I have. So here's the throttle, and this is basically at idle right here, or basically engine cutoff, I think. And then I'm going to go ahead and go forward with it So that's how much throw I have. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to measure that scale on here and push in. So my throw is about 5/8 of an inch, roughly 5/8 of an inch. Okay. See that? So I have about 5/8 of an inch throw on the throttle. Let me write that down. And then if I go to my servo right now, hopefully you can see this. We'll just kind of get an idea of how much I have on the servo right now with no adjustments. And I'll start with the outer one, the outer hole. Something right there. So let's go ahead and move it. Yeah, so I've got roughly close to 7/8 of movement, maybe a little less than 7/8. The 16th inch less, so that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 11, 13 16ths. I guess I could have counted backwards. So we go here to here. Yeah, somewhere around there. Did that make sense? 13 16ths? Yeah. And then I had, like I said, I had 5/8. So this is going to have to, obviously it's going to have to be reduced down. The amount of throw I have on the servo is going to have to be reduced down. Now, I know the choke is going to be a lot less. The choke barely moves. So let's go ahead and measure the choke. Kind of hard because I'm holding everything. So I'm right about there. I think I'm, yeah, about a 1/2 inch, maybe a little less than a 1/2 inch. Kind of like about 5/16 or so. Yeah, wow. Okay, so obviously the movement on the choke servo, or the choke servo is going to have to be reduced a whole bunch. Even if I went on the inner, like an inner hole where it's traveling less, it's still going to be, still going to be way too much. So the key thing right now is that the servos aren't getting in the way of each other. They're in a good location. They're far enough back the way I needed them to be, and the movement of the servos aren't going to get in the way of each other. So now I just need to go ahead and cut approximately where the outer control rod or the conduit's going to be, and then the inner control rod, and then we'll put in our connectors and get them approximately where they need to be. Now, one thing I know that I'm going to have to do is I know that I'm going to have to put some support kind of bracing for these things, especially for the choke, because the choke is kind of stiff and there'd be too much flexing in here. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by putting a brace. I'll put a brace right over here for the control rods, and then I may have to put another one up in the front. I'm not sure, but hopefully it won't be too bad. We'll see how it goes. It's okay to have a little bit of flexibility in them. That's not a bad thing, as long as you get the movement that you need out of it to get your full throttle and get everything to work, you're fine. So what I'm going to do now off camera, because it doesn't make sense to kind of go through it on camera, is just because my system's a different system and it's not this isn't about the Futaba transmitter, I'm just going to go ahead and make my adjustments, get my throws or the travel about close to where they need to be by making adjustments on my transmitter, and then we'll come back and we'll cut these guys and we'll get the servos set on the rails here. Alright, so I adjusted my endpoints, and let's start with the choke. You'll see now, you should be able to notice that it doesn't travel nearly as far. So this is closed choke, that's open, and I think I'm close to, let's see, I'm just going to measure, I'll measure from here. So I'm a little bit less than a 1/2 inch or so. Then my inner hole, the middle one, is 3/8. So I'm going to leave it just like that, and then I can make adjustments from there. And then for my throttle, maybe see, I actually determined that the second hole in is closer to where I needed, which was the 5/8. So if I measure on the second hole, I'm just going to start with 1 right here. If I measure from the second hole, go to there, you can see it's close to 5/8 of an inch. Yeah, something like that. So again, I'll make some minor adjustments, but I think I'm close enough now to cut these control rods to the right length. So the diameter of the connecting rod wires here are too big for the holes, so I'm just going to go ahead and drill these out to the right size. So I'm going to do this one here. I'm going to start with this one. And I'm going to go at the inner one on this one also. Hopefully these fit in here. Yeah. Then I think these are a little bit too long. I just kind of cut these roughly. So I'm going to reduce them. I'm probably going to cut maybe about 1 inch or so off. They don't need to be this long. Okay, so again, this is the Dubro connector. I'll put a picture of it up on the screen here. And this is actually my favorite connector. It's really easy to use and it's really solid. So basically it's going to snaps in here if you haven't used these guys, but you got to make a 90-degree bend in the wire. So I'll put a 90-degree bend. It's about maybe 1/4 inch or so that you're going to need to bend at 90 degrees. And what happens is that will then, this guy will just plug onto that, or I'll show you in just a second, and then it snaps on. So let me go and put a 90-degree bend in here. And then what I found when using these things, it's best to try to get a 90-degree angle as close as possible. What happens is when you bend these, at least when I do it, you know, it's kind of hard to get a really tight 90-degree angle, but I do my best. And I'm just going to go a little bit beyond like that. You don't need too much. And I'm going to hold this really tight and try to just bend it at 90 degrees. It's probably too much. Let me go ahead and snap this on. So what happens, this goes on, so this goes into your servo arm, and then this guy goes over that, like that. And all you do is push it up and then snap it over. Yeah, so that's a little bit too much, so I'll just go ahead and cut it off with my Proxxon. Alright, so that's better. So let me go ahead and bend this one and we'll get them set up on the control rods. So now I'm just going to go ahead and tape these on to where they need to be located. I'm just going to tape them temporarily because what I need to do is, let's put this one here. What I need to do is find out the location or determine the location for the brace that I'm going to put in. Alright, so that tells me approximately where they're going to be. And then I'm going to locate a brace over here to support these right here in the middle. So I think my servos are actually in good spots right now, and I'm just going to mark them kind of where the holes are, just in case they move. I already marked it a little bit before, so now I can just screw them in now with the hardware that's supplied with them. Then I'll just use the owl to get the hole started. It's always helpful. That. Just like going to the dentist. No Novocaine needed. So now, like we always do, kind of common practice is to set your screws into the wood and then turn them back out, and we'll put some thin CA on them to strengthen the wood and the threads in the wood. Alright, so the servos typically come with a little grommet like this, a little rubber sort of like shock absorber to put between the servo itself and the mounting wood. Helps absorb a little bit of vibration, I guess. So we'll put these on each of the little tabs, if you will. Just like that. For some reason, mounting the servos is always a fun step for me. I don't know why, but I kind of like doing this part a lot. Now the other thing that comes with these servos, which is very common, are these little sort of like, I guess they're brass or some kind of a metal bushing. Like that. Now that these are hooked up, I want to put a brace here because I think there's going to be a little bit too much flexibility in these control rods. Put that back in there real quick. So I'm just going to mark the location on this piece of plywood. I'm going to drill 2 holes, the same diameter as the outer push rods. And then I'm just going to slip this down, glue it onto this bulkhead, and then of course we'll use the little grommets or the retainers, if you will, that came with the set that I showed you earlier. We'll use those to kind of secure it up against this little support piece. So I'm just going to mark my locations. And then what I'll do is I'm just going to mark a location right underneath here. I'm just going to eyeball this. about 1.25 inches. As mentioned, the control rod set comes with this material to make little retaining grommets. So I'm just going to cut off about 4 of these. Alright, so as you can see, it was kind of tough to get those on there. They're a little bit tight, but once you get them sort of pushed on, then you can slide them down, it's okay. So I got these kind of set where I think they need to be approximately. Of course I can move them, and then I'll put my brace on over those. Okay, so let me put my other 2 rubber grommets on. And now I'll just push the other ones up against it from behind here. And then once it's close, then I'll glue this on, and then I can kind of adjust them later. So these are about where I want them. So let me go ahead and move this back a little bit. Alright, so I'm just going to be using my JB Weld 5-minute epoxy on this. I already got it mixed up. Now I want to use my servos again to make sure that I got them in the right level, right about there. And now I just need to prop this up against the back of this bulkhead here. We'll let this sit and come back and continue on with connecting these dudes right up here. Let's give it a test run here. There's the throttle. And then here is the choke. That little click you hear, that little snap, right? That thing. That's because that sound is transferring from the choke itself. It's like, as it closes, it does that little snap over here in the carburetor. That's what you're hearing. Alright, so now I can adjust sort of the end points to kind of see, I have to make sure I have the right amount of throw on these. So for example, I can pull this one out of the choke here, and if I pull this all the way back, I know that it's closed and it fits right into my arm right there. Now what I want to do is I want to push it closed. So there's that click again. And now I want to shut it and see where it lines up. So it lines up right on it. Okay? Because I made those adjustments and those measurements earlier. So I think it's pretty good. It should be closed completely and then open completely right there. Same thing for the throttle. Of course, I can pull the throttle all the way back, and that's my closed position there. and then I will now push it forward, open throttle all the way up to here, and if I push the control rod in, you can see that I'm a little bit short. What that means is that I can adjust now my endpoint to meet that location. So let me get the setting on my transmitter here. Okay, so now I have my throttle endpoint adjustment screen. I think I'll try to show it to you here. If we can slip it in, here it is. There's my endpoint adjustment screen. And you can see that I'm at 100% right there. So I can either go forward with it, I can increase it like this and bring it up to about where it needs to be. Oops, I probably should go back down a little bit. Forgot I was in the middle. Right about there, just snapped in. So that right there would be my full throttle, and then there's my low end right there, and you can see I got a little bit of buzz in there, so I'm going to go forward. Oops, a little bit like that, right about there. So you can see I can play with it. I can go ahead and use the endpoint adjustments on the transmitter to get everything in the right location. Now the problem with it, makes it a little bit difficult, of course, that's why I'm doing it this way, is because I can hardly see the carburetor. I can't see the workings inside the carburetor. I can look through the hole back here and kind of see the choke. But what I have to do is I basically have to just rely on the feel of it. And I know that, like I said, I'm completely closed and then completely open. Then I try to meet those locations with my endpoint adjustments. And that should work good. All right, so I'm trying to get a video of looking inside of the carburetor. There's the choke, and actually it's open, so you can kind of see how it works. So that closes it. There's the closed choke, and then obviously you open it up, pops open, and again you hear that snap, and that snaps inside there. It's not like it's snapped inside of the control rod or anything. Okay, and then if you look closely, it's kind of hard to make out. I'll see if I can get the throttle. Inside there's sort of like butterfly for the throttle behind that. You can barely see it kind of moving back there. So let me go ahead and move my camera if I can, get a little bit lower, right about there. Yeah, you can barely see it in there. Okay, so you can kind of see it opening and closing. So I hope that made sense. So basically all I'm doing is and I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but again all I'm doing is I'm just using the control rods as my starting point to find out where my closed and my open positions are. I measure those positions, the amount of throw. I try to measure it on the arc of the control horn or the control arm on the servo, and then I try to get everything done in that manner as close as possible, and then I fine-tune it with my endpoint adjustments. So now that I've done that, I can now add my little clips. Oops, there they are. Add my clips to the control rods here. So to make it easy, I'll just pull the control horn off, slip it onto my control rod, put the clip underneath it, just bring it around and snap it on. There you go. I really like those. They really are easy to use and they're very strong. I'll just put this guy back on there. I'll do the same thing for this one. Get a little bit of buzz in that one, so I'm going to have to adjust my endpoint a little bit on that. And the last thing I did is I did it off camera actually when I sanded these down, the control on the outside of these little control arms here, just to kind of clean them up, round them up a bit. But those are now done. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the carburetor itself. So again, here's the choke. And then here's our throttle. All right, well, this turned out to be quite a long video. I think part of it being so long was because I was narrating this time. I kind of changed up the format a little bit on this one and did a lot of narration Tell me what you think about that. I'm not sure if I like to do that because it tends to make the video longer and it takes me longer to produce it. But anyhow, give me your thoughts on that. And then the other thing is, I hope this all made sense to you and kind of how I set up these servos for the throttle and the choke for this DLE engine. It's a little bit different setup than a glow engine. So if you're new to gas engines like I am, you know, have some learning to do, but you know, check out some different forums and different channels and such and see what other people are doing. But the way I did it, I think will work out okay. So hopefully it made sense and it'll be useful to you. So that's going to be about it for this video. Thanks for watching my channel. Thanks for tagging along with this build, and we'll see you next time.